I found Bigfoot. But not only that, it's more than one Bigfoot, and they are aggressive. They do not want to be seen or studied. This is my warning to you. This is the story of how I barely survived my encounter with this species. I never thought I would be the guy telling this kind of story. I've been hiking solo for over 10 years now, logged hundreds of miles in the backcountry across a dozen different states, slept under more stars than I can count. Nothing ever happened to me that I couldn't explain with basic wilderness knowledge. No weird sounds, no strange tracks, no inexplicable experiences. Just me, the mountains, and the normal challenges that come with solo backpacking. Until last December, when I took a week-long trip into the northern Washington wilderness and encountered something that changed everything I thought I knew about what lives in these forests. What I'm about to tell you is exactly what happened, word for word, and I barely made it out alive. This was supposed to be a routine winter expedition, the kind I'd done dozens of times before. I had planned the route for months, spent hours poring over topographic maps, marked waypoints on my GPS, packed all the right gear for winter conditions. The destination was an old fire lookout tower about 20 miles into the backcountry, nestled high in the Cascade Mountains northeast of Mount Baker. I'd heard about this tower from other hikers, read trip reports online, seen a few photos. It looked like the perfect winter destination for someone who wanted true solitude. The weather forecast looked absolutely perfect for mid-December. Clear skies, temperatures hovering right around freezing during the day, dropping to maybe 10 or 15 degrees at night. Cold but manageable with the right gear. No storms predicted for at least a week. I loaded up my pack with 7 days worth of supplies, double-checked all my equipment, made sure I had extra batteries for my headlamp and backup fuel for my stove. I even brought my small camera to document the trip, something I'd been doing more regularly to share with friends back home. I drove out to the trailhead before sunrise on a Monday morning, parked in the empty lot, and shouldered my pack just as the first gray light was creeping over the eastern ridges. The temperature was right around 25 degrees, cold enough that my breath came out in thick clouds. I could hear the crunch of frozen snow under my boots as I started up the trail. There's something magical about being the first person to break trail after a fresh snowfall, seeing nothing but untouched white stretching out ahead of you. The first 2 days were absolutely perfect in every way. I mean, the kind of perfect that makes you remember why you love the wilderness in the first place, why you're willing to carry 40 pounds on your back and sleep in the cold just to experience this kind of solitude. Fresh snow blanketed everything in a thick, white layer that sparkled in the sunlight like someone had scattered diamonds across the landscape. The air was crisp and clean, sharp in my lungs, but invigorating. Every breath felt like it was clearing out all the stale city air I'd been breathing for months. I had the entire forest completely to myself. I didn't see another person, didn't even see any recent boot prints in the snow, just me and the wilderness. I saw plenty of wildlife, though, all the normal stuff you'd expect in these mountains. Deer tracks crossed the trail in several places, delicate hoof prints pressed into the snow. I watched a pair of ravens circling overhead one afternoon, calling to each other in that harsh, croaking voice they have. Found fox prints near a frozen stream where the animal had been hunting for mice or voles under the snow. I set up camp each night in perfect spots, little clearings where the snow wasn't too deep and there were enough trees nearby to provide some wind protection. I'd pitch my tent, gather some dead wood for a small fire, cook dinner over my backpacking stove while watching the sun set behind the peaks. Those sunsets were incredible, all oranges and purples painting the snow-covered mountains. Then I'd crawl into my sleeping bag and fall asleep listening to the wind moving through the pine trees, that soft whooshing sound that's become like a lullaby to me over the years. On the third morning, everything changed in a way I still can't fully explain. I woke up just after dawn like I always do, that internal clock that comes from years of backcountry travel. But something felt immediately wrong even before I opened my eyes. The first thing I noticed when I sat up in my sleeping bag was the silence. Not the normal peaceful quiet of the wilderness, but something different, something oppressive and unnatural. The forest was completely silent in a way I'd never experienced before in all my years of hiking. No birds calling their morning songs, no wind rustling the branches, no small animals skittering through the underbrush, no distant sound of creeks trickling, just this heavy, pressing quiet that seemed to push down on everything like a physical weight. Even my own movement seemed too loud, the rustle of my sleeping bag like thunder in that absolute stillness. I've spent enough time in the woods to know that silence like that means something specific, and it's never good. Animals go quiet when there's a predator nearby, when something dangerous is moving through their territory. It's a survival mechanism, this shared understanding among prey animals that when something at the top of the food chain shows up, you shut up and hide and hope it passes you by. I figured maybe a cougar was in the area, or possibly a bear that hadn't denned up yet for some reason. Mountain lions will hunt in winter, and every once in a while you hear about a bear that stays active through the cold months for one reason or another. I stayed alert as I broke camp that morning, packed everything up more carefully than usual, kept scanning the tree line while I worked. Every snap of a twig made me freeze and listen. Every shadow between the trees looked like it might be something watching me. But I didn't see anything out of the ordinary, so after about 45 minutes, I shouldered my pack and started hiking again. That's when I saw the first footprint, and my whole understanding of what was happening shifted into something I couldn't explain. I was following a ridgeline, crunching through about 6 inches of fresh powder that had fallen during the night, when I noticed tracks crossing my path at an angle. At first, from a distance of maybe 20 feet, I thought they had to be bear tracks. They were the right general size for a big black bear, or maybe even a grizzly, though grizzlies are rare this far west in Washington. But as I got closer, taking maybe 5 or 6 steps forward, the shape became clear, and my assumption fell apart completely. These prints were enormous, easily 18 inches long and maybe 7 or 8 inches wide at the widest point. But the shape was all wrong for a bear, wrong for any animal I'd ever tracked before. They showed 5 distinct toes, arranged almost exactly like a human foot would look. There was a clear heel impression, an arch that you could see pressed into the snow, a ball of the foot. The toe prints were separate and defined, not clumped together like you'd see with a bear paw. And they were spaced far apart, suggesting whatever made them was walking upright on 2 legs with a long stride. The distance between prints was probably 4 feet, maybe even more. No bear walks like that. Bears can rear up on their hind legs for short distances, but they don't stride along, leaving evenly spaced bipedal tracks through the snow. The prints were recent too, probably made within the last few hours based on how crisp the edges were in the snow. There was no wind drift filling them in, no ice crystals forming on the surfaces, no evidence of any melt and refreeze. Fresh tracks made that morning or maybe late the night before. I knelt down next to one of the prints, pulled off my glove even though the air was freezing, and put my hand down for scale. My hand, which is pretty average sized at maybe 7 inches long, looked tiny inside that footprint. Whatever had made this track was much, much larger than any human. I stopped and stared at those tracks for a long time, maybe 15 or 20 minutes, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My brain kept trying to rationalize it, to fit it into something I could understand. Bears hibernate in December. Everyone who knows anything about wildlife knows that. By mid-December, every bear in Washington should be deep in its den, sleeping away the winter months until spring. And even if this was some weird bear that was still active for some strange reason, the tracks were just wrong, too human-shaped, too deliberate in their placement. I pulled out my phone to take a picture, then remembered with a sinking feeling that I was way out of cell range anyway. I had turned my phone off the first day to save battery, only using it occasionally to check my GPS coordinates. But I turned it on now and snapped a few photos of the tracks, knowing I'd want to look at them later even if I couldn't show anyone else right away. The rational part of my brain kept trying to explain it away as some kind of hoax, maybe tracks made by someone with fake wooden feet as a prank. But who would be out here in the middle of winter, miles from any road, making fake Bigfoot tracks? It didn't make any sense. I kept hiking, following my planned route toward the tower, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It's a feeling everyone gets sometimes in the wilderness, that prickle on the back of your neck that makes you think eyes are on you. Usually it doesn't mean anything, just your primitive brain being overly cautious. But this felt different, more intense, more real. Every 50 yards or so, I'd stop and turn around quickly, trying to catch whatever might be following me. I'd scan the tree line behind me, looking for movement, for anything out of place. I never saw anything clearly, but I couldn't shake the sensation. And then I started noticing the broken branches. They were snapped off at 7, 8, maybe even 9 feet high, way too high for a deer or elk to reach, even if they were stretching their necks up. Some of them were thick too, the kind of branches that would take serious strength to break. I'm talking branches 2 or 3 inches in diameter, snapped clean off and hanging down or lying in the snow. I stopped to examine one of them, a broken hemlock branch about 8 feet off the ground. The break was fresh, showing white wood inside that hadn't had time to weather or darken. Whatever had broken these branches was tall and strong, moving through the forest recently. The break seemed to follow a path roughly parallel to the trail I was on, like something had been walking through the woods just out of sight. My heart started beating faster. I picked up my pace, not quite running, but definitely moving faster than I probably should have been given the snow conditions. By mid-afternoon, I was moving as fast as I dared, practically jogging through sections where the snow wasn't too deep. My pack was bouncing on my back, the straps cutting into my shoulders from the awkward gait. That's when I caught the first real glimpse of it, the first time I saw the thing that had been following me. Movement in my peripheral vision, off to my right, maybe 100 yards away through the trees, something large and dark, moving through the forest parallel to my route. I spun around fast to get a clear look, my heart hammering in my chest. But whatever it was had already disappeared behind a thick stand of evergreens. All I saw was a flash of dark fur or hair, a suggestion of size and bulk, and then nothing. My heart was pounding now, blood rushing in my ears. I stood there for probably 5 minutes, just watching and listening, my hand resting on the can of bear spray clipped to my belt. Nothing moved, no sound broke the silence. But I knew something was out there. I could feel it in my bones. I started walking again, slower now, more carefully, constantly checking behind me and to the sides. Within maybe 10 or 15 minutes, I caught another flash of movement, this time on my left side. The same kind of quick glimpse, a large, dark shape moving between the trees before disappearing. Whatever was out there was keeping pace with me, staying roughly the same distance away, moving when I moved and stopping when I stopped. It was deliberately staying just out of clear sight, using the trees and shadows to remain hidden. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, shadows playing through the trees in the late afternoon sun. But then I'd stop walking and the movement would stop. I'd start again and it would start. This thing was deliberately staying parallel to me, watching me, following me with clear intent. The realization sent ice water through my veins. This wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. Something was actively tracking me through the forest. Around 4 in the afternoon, with maybe an hour of daylight left before the sun dropped behind the western peaks, I came across something that made my blood run cold. Just off the trail, about 30 yards, tucked into a small clearing ringed by old-growth cedars, I found structures. Not animal dens, not natural formations, but actual structures that showed clear evidence of construction and intent. Tree branches had been woven together into crude lean-to shelters, some of them big enough for a person to crawl inside. The construction was primitive but deliberate, showing planning and execution. Someone or something had gathered these branches, stripped off the smaller twigs, and woven them together in a way that would shed rain or snow. The shelters were oriented to face away from the prevailing wind, tucked under the larger trees for additional protection. Around the shelters, I found evidence of habitation that made my hands start shaking. Piles of stripped pine cones sat in organized heaps, like someone had been harvesting the nuts and eating them systematically. Scattered fish bones lay in one area, picked completely clean of any meat, showing signs of being cracked open to get at the marrow. Clumps of deer fur caught on branches at various heights suggested a kill site or butchering area. Under one of the larger evergreens, a massive spruce that must have been 200 years old, I saw a depression in the snow that looked like a nest. A circular area maybe 6 or 7 feet across that had been packed down flat, lined with what looked like cedar boughs and dried grass. Around it were more of those massive footprints, dozens of them crisscrossing the area in every direction. Then the smell hit me and I almost gagged. It was awful, this thick combination of wet dog and rotting meat, and something else I couldn't identify. A deep, musky stench that seemed to coat the inside of my nose and throat, making me want to cough. The smell was so strong it actually had a presence, a physical quality that made my eyes water. I backed away from the clearing, my hand instinctively going to the canister of bear spray clipped to my belt. Whatever lived here, whatever called this place home, I absolutely did not want to meet it. The rational part of my brain was still trying to explain this away. Maybe it was a homeless person living out here in the woods. Maybe it was some kind of survival enthusiast or primitive living practitioner. But the footprints were too big, the structures were too crude, and the smell was too animal, too wild to be human. I was still about 8 miles from the fire tower based on my GPS, with night coming on fast. I briefly considered turning back, retracing my route, and heading for my truck. But that would mean at least a full day of hiking to reach the trailhead, maybe more in these conditions with the heavy snow. The tower was closer, and once I got there, I'd have 4 walls and a door I could lock. Assuming the door still had a lock, assuming the tower was still standing and hadn't collapsed in the years since it was abandoned. I made the decision to push forward, to try to reach the tower before dark. It was a gamble, but it seemed like the better option. I started hiking again, moving as fast as I safely could, constantly checking behind me. The light was fading fast, that peculiar blue twilight that comes to the mountains in winter when the sun drops behind the peaks, but there's still enough light to see. The sun was getting low, maybe 20 minutes from setting, when I stopped to rest and eat something. My muscles were burning from the fast pace and I needed calories. I found a fallen log near a frozen creek and sat down, pulling out an energy bar and my water bottle. The creek was maybe 75 yards across, completely iced over and covered with a fresh layer of snow. I was sitting there chewing mechanically, trying to calm my racing thoughts, when I saw it clearly for the first time. On the far side of the creek, something emerged from the tree line with slow, deliberate steps. At first, for maybe half a second, my brain tried to process it as a bear standing upright. But within seconds, I knew that's not what it was. I knew with absolute certainty that I was looking at something else entirely, something I'd never seen before, and had only heard about in stories and legends. This thing stood upright on 2 legs, easily 8 feet tall, maybe even more. It was hard to judge the exact height from that distance, but it was massive, towering, bigger than any human could possibly be. Its entire body was covered in dark brown or black fur, thick and shaggy like a bear's winter coat, but the proportions were all wrong for a bear. The arms were too long, hanging down past where the knees would be. The shoulders were too wide, broader than any linebacker I'd ever seen. The head was too flat, sitting on top of the shoulders without much visible neck. It walked toward the creek with a smooth, natural gait, arms swinging at its sides the way a person walks down the street. Not the lumbering shuffle of a bear on its hind legs, not the awkward hopping you sometimes see when a bear tries to walk upright. This was real bipedal locomotion, purposeful and controlled and natural. This thing walked on 2 legs because that's how it was built to walk. I sat there completely frozen, the energy bar falling out of my hand into the snow without me even noticing. My mind was screaming at me that this couldn't be real, that I was seeing things, that I must be having some kind of altitude-induced hallucination or snow blindness. But my eyes were telling me different. This was real. This was happening. This thing was real. The creature stopped at the edge of the frozen creek, maybe 70 or 75 yards from where I sat on the log. It turned its head slowly and looked directly at me. Not a glance, not a quick look. It turned its whole upper body toward me and stared, making deliberate eye contact. I got a clear view of its face for the first time and felt my breath catch in my throat. The face was flat, more human than ape, more person than animal. There was a heavy brow ridge jutting out over deep-set eyes, giving the face a primitive look like you see in museum reconstructions of early hominids. The nose was broad and flat, the mouth was wide, the lips almost non-existent. But it was the eyes that got me. The eyes were dark, almost completely black, but there was something in them. Intelligence, awareness, thought. This wasn't just an animal running on instinct. This thing was thinking, evaluating, making decisions about what to do. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 or 15 seconds. I didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink. I was completely paralyzed by a mixture of fear and disbelief and awe. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel my pulse in my temples. My hands had gone numb, and I wasn't sure if it was from fear or from the cold or both. Then, without any sound or threatening gesture or any warning at all, the creature simply turned and walked back into the forest. It didn't run or hurry or look back. Just calmly, deliberately walked away until the trees swallowed it up and it was gone. I sat there for another 5 minutes at least, maybe longer, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely zip my pack back up when I finally forced myself to move. I knew what I had seen. I knew it was real. Every fiber of my being knew that what had just happened actually happened, that this wasn't a dream or a hallucination or a mistake. But my brain still couldn't quite accept it. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it. The thing that's supposed to be a myth, a legend, a campfire story told to scare kids. It was real, and it had just looked me right in the eyes from 75 yards away. I got moving again, walking as fast as I dared in the fading light. My legs felt like rubber, but adrenaline was pushing me forward. The tower was still at least 6 miles away based on my GPS. I had maybe 45 minutes before full dark, maybe an hour if I was lucky. I picked up the pace, practically jogging through sections where the snow wasn't too deep, stumbling and catching myself on trees when I hit patches of ice or hidden obstacles under the powder. Every shadow looked like that creature. Every snapping branch made me jump and spin around. The fear was like nothing I'd ever felt before in my entire life. I've been scared in the wilderness before, had close calls with weather and terrain and wildlife. But this was different. This was primal terror, the kind of fear our ancestors must have felt when they were still prey animals running from bigger predators. This was existential dread at confronting something that shouldn't exist. When darkness finally came, complete and total, as it only gets in the deep wilderness far from any artificial light, I had no choice but to stop and make camp. I couldn't keep hiking in the pitch black, not through this terrain. I'd break an ankle or fall off a cliff or get completely lost. I found a small clearing just big enough for my tent and set up in record time. My hands were shaking from adrenaline and cold, but I got the tent up faster than I ever had before. I built a fire bigger than I needed, way bigger than I'd normally make in the backcountry where you're supposed to minimize your impact. But I didn't care about wilderness ethics right now. I needed the light, needed the psychological comfort of those flames, needed the primitive reassurance that fire gives humans. I gathered every piece of dead wood I could find in a 50-foot radius and piled it next to my fire ring. Then I sat there feeding wood into the flames, my back pressed against a tree, my knife in one hand and the bear spray in the other. That's when I heard them, and that's when I realized this was even worse than I'd thought. Heavy footsteps circling my camp, crunching through the snow and the darkness beyond my firelight. I could track the sound as it moved from one side of my camp to the other, circling slowly, deliberately, never getting closer than maybe 30 or 40 feet, but never going away either. The footsteps would stop for a while, and I'd sit there in silence, hoping whatever it was had left. Then they'd start again, coming from a different direction. Branches snapped in the forest, not the small twigs that break when a deer walks by, but big branches. The kind that make sharp cracking sounds that echo. I caught glimpses of large shapes moving between the trees, backlit by moonlight when the moon would peek through the clouds. Dark silhouettes that were too big and too upright to be any animal I could name. Then came the sounds that truly terrified me, the sounds that made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. Deep vocalizations from multiple directions, echoing through the trees like nothing I'd ever heard. They weren't growls or roars like an animal would make. They weren't howls like a wolf or coyote. They were structured with rhythm and cadence and pattern. Syllables. Words in a language I'd never heard before. Guttural and harsh, sounding like they came from massive chests and throats. But definitely language. These things were communicating with each other and they wanted me to know it. I heard at least 3 different voices, maybe 4 or even 5. One was deeper than the others, with a booming quality that seemed to come from a chest the size of a barrel. That one would make a series of barking sounds, sharp and commanding. Then another would respond from a different direction with different sounds. Back and forth, like they were having a conversation. They were talking about me. I was absolutely sure of it. Coordinating, planning, discussing what to do with the human who had wandered into their territory. Another voice was higher pitched than the deepest one, not quite as low and rumbling. Could have been a female or a younger one. I had no way to know. And there was a third that sounded rougher, more aggressive, with a growling quality under the vocalizations. The calls would come from one direction, then another would answer from somewhere else, then a third from yet another direction. They were surrounding me, moving through the forest in a coordinated pattern, working together. I realized with growing horror that they were intelligent enough to work together in groups, to communicate and strategize and coordinate their movements. This wasn't one animal that I could try to scare off or avoid. This was a family group or a clan or whatever you want to call it. Multiple individuals acting with purpose and coordination. I didn't sleep at all that night. not for one single minute. I sat by the fire, feeding it constantly, keeping the flames high, listening to those voices calling back and forth in the darkness. They never tried to enter my camp, never got closer than the tree line, but they never left either. They just circled and called to each other, letting me know they were there, reminding me that I was in their territory and they could do whatever they wanted to me. It was psychological warfare, and it was absolutely working. My mind kept racing through scenarios. What would I do if they rushed the camp? Could I fight them off? The bear spray might work on one, maybe, but there were at least 3 of them, probably more. My knife was useless against something that size and strength. Running was impossible in the dark through the snow. I was trapped, surrounded, completely at their mercy if they decided to do something. When the first gray light of dawn finally started filtering through the trees, the sounds stopped. Just like that, as if someone had flipped a switch. The forest went silent again, that same oppressive silence from the morning before. I waited until there was enough light to see clearly, enough to make sure I wouldn't trip over something if I had to run. Then I got up and looked around my camp. Everything had been disturbed during the night while I sat there by the fire. My backpack had been moved, dragged about 10 feet from where I'd left it propped against a tree. Something had pulled it over, unzipped the outer pockets, pawed through the contents. The food bag I'd hung from a branch was completely gone, rope cut cleanly as if with a knife or severed with enough strength to snap the cord. Boot prints were everywhere in the snow, circling the camp, coming right up to the edge of where my firelight would have reached. But worse than the boot prints were the handprints, and these made my stomach drop. Massive handprints pressed deep into the snow all around my tent, sunk in 4 or 5 inches from the weight. 5 fingers, clearly visible, humanoid structure, but enormous. Each print was at least 10 inches across, maybe more. The fingers were thick and long, showing clear knuckle impressions. One handprint was right next to my tent door, like something had knelt down and reached out to touch the fabric. I could see where the nylon had been pushed in slightly, where fingers had pressed against it. They could have grabbed me any time during the night. They could have ripped that tent open like tissue paper and dragged me out into the forest. But they didn't. They chose not to. They chose to circle and call and watch and let me sit there terrified but unharmed. I made a split-second decision that probably saved my life. I abandoned most of my gear right there, left my sleeping bag, left my stove, left extra clothes and food and anything I didn't absolutely need. I kept only my water, my knife, the bear spray, and a few emergency supplies in a small day pack. Everything else stayed behind. I had to move fast and I had to move light. I started running toward the tower, or as close to running as you can manage with even a small pack in deep snow. My breath came in ragged gasps, creating huge clouds of condensation in the cold morning air. The tower was about 8 miles away. If I pushed hard, really pushed, I might make it before nightfall. I couldn't spend another night out here. I wouldn't survive it psychologically even if they left me physically unharmed. I'd been moving maybe 20 or 30 minutes, making decent time despite the snow, when I realized they were following me again. But this time they weren't hiding. I could hear them crashing through the forest behind me, heavy footfalls and snapping branches and that occasional deep vocalization. They weren't trying to be quiet anymore. They were making noise deliberately, wanting me to know they were there, wanting me to know I couldn't escape. Every time I tried to veer off my planned route, to take a shortcut or change direction to try to lose them, one of them would appear ahead of me. Just a quick glimpse, a massive shape stepping out from behind a tree maybe 50 yards away, blocking my path, then disappearing again when I changed direction. They were herding me like dogs herd sheep, pushing me in a specific direction, keeping me on a particular route. I had no idea where they were taking me or why. Were they leading me to their main settlement? To some kind of trap? Were they playing with me before they attacked? My mind was racing with possibilities, none of them good. But I didn't have a choice. Every time I tried to deviate from the direction they wanted me to go, they'd cut me off, force me back onto their chosen path. The trail they were forcing me onto led into a ravine I hadn't planned to go through, a steep-sided valley that wasn't on my planned route. The terrain got steeper, rockier, harder to navigate. I had to slow down, had to watch my footing on ice-covered rocks and fallen logs hidden under the snow. All the while I could hear them around me, keeping pace, maintaining their loose circle, boxing me in. My lungs were burning from the exertion and the fear, from breathing hard in the cold air. My legs felt like rubber, muscles screaming from the constant climbing and the heavy snow. But I kept moving, kept pushing forward, because the alternative was to stop and let them close in. The ravine opened into a wider area ringed by cliff faces, and that's when I saw it. Their home, their settlement, their community. There's no other word for it. This wasn't just a den or a nest or a temporary shelter. This was a permanent living space, carefully chosen and deliberately arranged, and it proved beyond any doubt that these creatures weren't just animals. Along the base of a cliff wall, tucked under rock overhangs that provided natural shelter from rain and snow, were multiple dwelling sites, large depressions in the ground, each one 6 or 7 feet across, lined with evergreen boughs and what looked like deer hides. The boughs were arranged in layers, clearly placed deliberately to provide insulation from the cold ground. The hides had been scraped clean of fur in some spots, showing someone knew how to process them. Food caches hung from branches above the snow line, carefully placed where they wouldn't be accessible to smaller animals. I could see dried fish hanging from one branch, the bodies split open and preserved somehow. Another cache held what looked like roots and nuts bundled in more deer hide. They were storing food for winter, planning ahead. This wasn't opportunistic feeding like an animal would do. This was foresight. There were tools, actual manufactured tools, rocks with worn edges that had clearly been used repeatedly for scraping or cutting, the edges showing deliberate shaping and sharpening. Heavy sticks with sharpened points for digging, the tips hardened in fire based on the charred appearance, a flat rock that looked like it had been used as a grinding surface, showing wear patterns from repeated use. Against the cliff face, I saw burn marks and soot stains, extensive evidence of fire use. This wasn't a one-time fire. These marks were built up over time, layers of soot that suggested regular, ongoing use. Piles of charred wood sat in organized heaps nearby, partially burned logs saved for later use. Next to the fire area was what looked like a cooking stone, a flat rock stained and blackened from repeated heating. This wasn't just a den or a nest, this was a community, a culture. They had social organization, division of labor, accumulated knowledge passed down somehow. They understood fire, they understood food preservation, they understood tool use and shelter construction. Everything I was looking at spoke to intelligence, to planning, to abstract thinking. I stood there staring at it all, my mind trying to process what I was seeing. These weren't animals in any normal sense of the word. Animals don't build communities like this. Animals don't preserve food for winter months ahead of time. Animals don't create tools and pass down knowledge of fire making. Whatever these creatures were, they were something else entirely. Something between human and animal. Something we'd classified as myth because we couldn't handle the reality of what they were. That's when they emerged from the forest, and I realized they'd been waiting for me to see all of this. 5 of them moving out of the trees in a coordinated line, surrounding me completely in a loose circle. I'd been so focused on the settlement, so overwhelmed by what I was seeing, that I hadn't heard them closing in. Now there was no escape. They formed a circle around me, massive shapes blocking every possible route out. The largest one stepped forward from the group, and I understood immediately that this was the leader. It had to be 10 feet tall, maybe even 11, with shoulders so broad they seemed impossible. Muscles rippled under the thick fur, visible even through the shaggy coat. The arms were longer than seemed natural, hands hanging down past where the knees would be on a human. This was clearly the alpha, the one whose deep voice I'd heard coordinating the others during the night. It moved with authority, with confidence, with the body language of something that had never met a challenge it couldn't overcome. The others deferred to it, stepping back to give it space, lowering their heads slightly in what looked like submission or respect. Pack dynamics, social hierarchy, more evidence of intelligence and organization. The leader stopped maybe 10 feet from me and looked down, making direct eye contact. I'm 6 feet tall, and it towered over me, making me feel like a child. Then it opened its mouth and spoke. Actual words in that guttural, harsh language I'd heard during the night. The sounds were deeper than anything a human could produce, resonating from somewhere deep in that massive chest. The syllables had structure, grammar, meaning that I couldn't understand but could recognize as language. I had no idea what it was saying, obviously, but the tone was absolutely clear. Anger, threat, territorial aggression. This was a warning, a challenge. The body language matched the tone, shoulders squared, head forward, arms slightly away from the body in a posture that radiated dominance and threat. The leader raised one massive arm, finger spread wide, and pointed away from the settlement toward the direction I'd come from. The gesture was unmistakable, universal. It was telling me to leave, to get out of their territory. This was their land, their home, their sacred space, and I was trespassing. I was an intruder, and I needed to go. I started backing away slowly, hands up in front of me, palms out, trying to make myself look as non-threatening as possible. My heart was hammering in my chest so hard I thought it might break a rib. That's when one of the younger ones lunged forward and everything went to hell. It wasn't the leader, but one of the others, smaller but still massive compared to me. It swung one arm in a wide arc and hit me hard across the shoulder, sending me flying. I flew through the air for what felt like several feet and sprawled into the snow, the impact knocking the wind out of me. I rolled, gasping for air, tried to get to my feet, but they were closing in now. All 5 of them making aggressive sounds, barking and hooting, and making those deep vocalizations that sounded like words. The sounds echoed off the cliff face, seeming to come from everywhere at once. One grabbed my small pack and ripped it off my shoulders with such force it tore the straps clean off. The creature shook the pack violently like a dog with a toy, dumping the contents into the snow. My water bottle flew through the air and smashed against a rock. My emergency supplies scattered everywhere. Another one, possibly the younger one that had hit me, picked up a rock the size of a football and raised it over its head, bellowing at me. I could see its teeth, yellowed and massive, and smell its breath, hot and rank with the smell of old meat. I scrambled to my feet and ran, just pure panic, pure survival instinct kicking in. I crashed through the underbrush, slipping on ice, branches whipping my face, my lungs burning. Behind me, I could hear them giving chase. Heavy footfalls getting closer, crashing through the forest like a freight train, that horrible barking and hooting echoing around me. They could have caught me easily based on the sounds, but I realized they were toying with me, testing me, playing with me like a cat plays with a mouse. They were staying just close enough to terrify me, but not close enough to actually grab me. Then the sticks and rocks started hitting me from behind, not thrown hard enough to kill or even seriously injure, but enough to hurt, to leave bruises to slow me down. I took a stick to the back of the head that made my vision swim. A rock caught me between the shoulder blades, knocking the wind out of me again. I stumbled and fell face first into the snow, my hands sinking deep into the powder. I could hear them getting closer, could hear them right behind me. I crawled forward desperately, saw a fallen log ahead, and dove behind it, pressing myself against the rotting wood. Through the gaps in the log, I could see them approaching, massive shapes moving through the trees with purpose. They surrounded the log quickly, efficiently, reaching over with those enormous hands trying to grab me. I could smell their breath, hot and rank. I could see the intelligence in those dark eyes, the awareness. They knew exactly what they were doing. One got hold of my jacket, fingers closing on the fabric like a vice, and started dragging me out from behind the log. I was screaming now, making sounds I didn't know I could make, fighting uselessly against strength that was just incomprehensible. In desperation, with my back against the literal wall of that log, I reached for my knife, the only weapon I had left, the last option I had. I pulled it from the sheath on my belt and slashed blindly at the hand gripping my jacket, not even aiming, just swinging the blade in panic. The knife connected with flesh, and I felt it slice through, felt the resistance of skin and muscle. Dark blood welled up on the creature's palm, running down its wrist. It roared in pain, a sound so loud and deep it seemed to shake the ground, and jerked its hand back, releasing my jacket. I fell back against the log, still holding the knife, expecting them to tear me apart for what I'd done. I'd drawn blood. I'd injured one of them. They were going to kill me now. This was it. This was how I died, torn apart by creatures that aren't supposed to exist. But something strange happened, something I still don't fully understand. Everything stopped. All 5 of them froze in place, staring at the wounded one. Not moving, not making sound, just staring. The injured creature held up its hand, looking at the bleeding cut with what seemed like surprise or confusion, like it couldn't quite believe what had happened. Then it looked at me, then at the knife in my hand, then back at its bleeding palm. The other creatures watched this exchange, waiting. There was a long moment of silence where nobody moved, where time seemed to stop. Then the leader made a sharp barking sound, a clear command that cut through the tension. The others immediately backed away, giving me space, moving back from the log. The wounded one stepped back too, still holding its injured hand but no longer advancing. They formed a loose semicircle about 15 feet away, just standing there, watching me. The leader approached alone, slowly, deliberately, each step measured and careful. I was certain this was the end. I'd injured one of them, and now the leader was going to finish me, to tear me apart, to teach me a lesson, or to avenge its wounded packmate. But instead of attacking, instead of grabbing me or striking me, the leader leaned down and reached for the knife I'd dropped in the snow during the chaos. It picked up the blade carefully between 2 fingers, like someone handling something delicate. It turned the knife over in those massive hands, examining it with obvious curiosity. It studied the edge, the handle, the blood still wet on the blade. For maybe 30 seconds, it just looked at the knife, turning it this way and that, holding it up to catch the light. Then, to my complete and utter shock, it dropped the knife back in the snow right next to me. Just dropped it there and stepped back. The leader made eye contact one more time, and I understood the expression on that face, even though it was so different from human. It was a warning, but also something else. Maybe understanding, maybe respect. They could have killed me, they could have torn me to pieces like tissue paper, but they were choosing not to. They were giving me a chance. One chance, a warning to leave and never come back. The leader gestured again toward the direction away from their settlement, toward where I needed to go. The same pointing motion from before, but different somehow. Not angry now, just firm. Final. Then all 5 of them turned together, moving in unison, and walked back into the forest. They disappeared into the trees as silently as they'd appeared, leaving me lying there in the snow next to that log. I don't know how long I stayed there after they left. Could have been 5 minutes, could have been half an hour. Time had stopped meaning anything. Eventually, I forced myself to get up. My whole body hurt. Covered in bruises and scrapes, I grabbed the knife from the snow, my hand still shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I started moving again, heading in the direction the leader had pointed, toward where the tower should be. Every muscle in my body hurt. I had cuts and bruises everywhere, was bleeding from a dozen scrapes and scratches, could feel the spots where rocks had hit me already swelling up. But I was alive and I was moving, and that's all that mattered. I kept going for the next 4 hours, barely stopping to rest, barely stopping to catch my breath. The adrenaline was the only thing keeping me going, that and the absolute terror that if I stopped, they might change their minds and come back. The sun was getting low again, the shadows getting long, when I finally saw it through the trees ahead. The fire lookout tower standing on its wooden stilts against the darkening sky. I almost cried with relief when I saw it. I forced my exhausted legs to move faster, practically running the last 100 yards. I climbed the stairs as fast as I could, testing each board carefully because some of them looked rotten, and found the door unlocked just like I'd hoped. I stumbled inside and immediately started barricading the entrance with everything I could move. An old desk, filing cabinets, anything heavy enough to provide even psychological security. The tower was old and dusty, clearly abandoned years ago, but the walls were solid and the roof was intact, and that's all I cared about. I found an emergency supply box in the corner with some ancient canned food, matches that were probably decades old but still worked, and a wool blanket that smelled musty but was warm. I got the wood stove going with trembling hands, using old newspaper and wood from a pile someone had left long ago. I treated my wounds as best I could with the limited first aid supplies I had left, using water from my bottle to clean the cuts, wrapping the worst ones with strips torn from my shirt. Then I wrapped myself in the blanket and just sat there, watching the door, listening. As darkness fell completely outside, I heard them again, those same vocalizations, that same language, echoing through the forest around the tower base. They'd followed me here, tracked me to my refuge. I looked out the window and saw shapes moving in the moonlight, dark silhouettes circling the base of the tower. They were walking around the structure, occasionally reaching up to shake the support beams, testing them. The whole tower would shudder and creak when they did that, making me worry it might collapse. But they didn't try to climb up, didn't try to break in through the door or windows. They were just making sure I knew they were there, making sure I understood that they were watching, that they could reach me if they wanted to. I spent that whole night awake again, sitting by the wood stove, feeding it pieces of wood, listening to them move around below. Every sound made me flinch. Every creak of the tower made me think it was about to come crashing down. But they never tried to get in, never tried to pull the tower down. They were just watching, monitoring, making sure I stayed where I was, and didn't try to come back into their territory. When dawn came, the sound stopped for the last time. I waited until full daylight, until I could see clearly in every direction. Then I looked out the window. They were standing in a line about 50 yards from the tower, all 5 of them just standing there in the open, watching. Not hiding now, not threatening, just observing. I watched them for several minutes, and they watched me back. Then the leader, that massive creature that had spared my life twice now, raised one arm. It wasn't a threatening gesture. It wasn't pointing me away. It was something else. An acknowledgement maybe, a salute, or maybe a farewell, a final goodbye. Then they all turned together, moving in perfect unison, and walked back into the forest. They disappeared between the trees, and I never saw them again. I realized what had just happened, what the whole thing meant. They'd been making sure I was actually leaving their territory. The tower marked the boundary of their land, the edge of what they considered theirs. Once I'd reached it, once they knew I was on my way out and wouldn't be coming back, they'd let me go. They'd given me the night to rest in safety, had watched to make sure I didn't try to sneak back, and then they'd left. Permission granted to leave. I waited until mid-morning, giving them plenty of time to get far away before I finally left the tower. The hike out was brutal, one of the hardest things I've ever done. 12 miles to my truck through deep snow, with my body beat to hell and my mind traumatized. Every step hurt. Every breath hurt. I was injured, exhausted, and terrified the whole way. I kept looking over my shoulder, kept scanning the tree line for any sign of them, kept listening for those vocalizations or those heavy footsteps, but I never saw or heard anything else. No tracks, no sounds, nothing. It was like they'd just vanished into the wilderness. Or maybe they'd made their point and decided I wasn't worth following anymore. I'd been warned, I'd been taught a lesson, and now I was leaving. That was enough. I reached my truck just as the sun was setting, collapsed into the driver's seat, and just sat there for a long time trying to process everything. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. When the engine finally started, the sound of normal civilization, I almost cried. I drove straight through to the nearest town without stopping once, didn't even slow down for anything. I went to a clinic the next day, told the doctor I'd taken a bad fall while hiking and gotten pretty beat up. He examined my injuries, counted the bruises, looked at the cuts. He didn't seem entirely convinced by my story, but he patched me up anyway. Bruised ribs that made breathing painful for weeks, multiple contusions and lacerations across my back and shoulders. Mild hypothermia from my time in the cold. Could have been a lot worse, he said. I just nodded and didn't say anything else. If he'd known the truth, he'd have thought I was crazy. It took me weeks to really process what had happened out there, to be able to think about it without my hands starting to shake. I've gone over it 1,000 times in my head, trying to make sense of it all, trying to find some rational explanation. The thing is, they could have killed me at any point during those 2 days, during that first night when they surrounded my camp, when they herded me into their settlement, when I slashed one with my knife. They had every opportunity and every reason to kill me, but they didn't. They chose not to. And that tells me something important about what they are. I wasn't actually threatening them in any real way. I was just trespassing, wandering into territory I didn't know was theirs. When I fought back and drew blood, they understood it was self-defense, that I was scared and defending myself. They stopped. They gave me back my weapon. They showed me the way out of their land. That's not animal behavior. That's reasoning. That's mercy. These creatures, whatever they are, wherever they came from, they're not mindless animals running on instinct. They have language that's complex and structured. They have culture and traditions and social organization. They understand tool use and fire and food preservation. They have territorial boundaries and they defend them. They communicate and coordinate and make group decisions. They showed restraint when they could have shown violence. They gave mercy when they could have given death. That's intelligence. That's sentience. That's something that deserves respect. I'll never go back to that area. Never. I won't tell anyone exactly where it happened or how to find that settlement. I won't give coordinates or landmarks or detailed directions. Some places aren't meant for humans. Some things are better left alone. Those mountains belong to something older than us, something that's been there long before we showed up and will probably be there long after we're gone. They found a way to survive in the deepest wilderness, and they deserve to be left in peace. If you're out there hiking in the deep wilderness and everything suddenly goes quiet, if you feel like you're being watched, if you see signs that don't make sense, listen to your gut. Don't investigate. Don't try to prove anything. Don't try to get closer or take pictures. Just pack up your stuff and get out as fast as you can. Leave the area and don't look back. Because if you push too far, if you wander into territory that isn't yours, if you ignore the warnings, you might not be as lucky as I was. And next time, those creatures might not show mercy. Next time, you might not come home at all. For more interesting stories, check this out.